to remember we were running still, had the whole world at our feet, watching seasons change. Our roads were lined with adventure, mountains in the way couldn't keep us from the sea. Here we stand, open arms. This is home where we are, ever strong in the world that we made. I
Okay, it should work now. Sorry about that. This actually explains a lot. Okay, given that it works now, I guess we can get going. Yes, it works. Perfect. I can hear myself on YouTube. So, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to yet another live stream. So today's topic is going to be, I guess, competitions. How to approach competitions. I basically took part in some competitions, quite a lot of them actually, and have some thoughts on it, so I wanted to talk a little about it. This is somewhat related to all the competitions I do on my blog / live stream channel / YouTube channel / IRC, and there usually is, well, at least one competition in the background. And as you know, I've started, well, I started actually with the competitions on my Polish channel, but I'm trying to expand them to, like, so that everyone can participate. So both the Winter Game Dev Challenge and the Summer Game Dev Challenge actually had, well, an English rule set, so everyone could play. Yeah, so I actually, you know, reviewed the games. They're pretty awesome, and I decided I also might have some tips which I can share with the general community on how to approach it and how to be a little better at competitions, because, you know, being good at, for example, programming isn't the same thing as being good in competitions. These are actually two distinct things, and this is one of the things I will talk about today. Perfect. So okay, today's moderator is KrzaQ. His nickname is somewhere here. Where is it? Yes, here. If you have any questions during the live stream, then do ask KrzaQ, because he will let me know using some telepathic methods, I guess. And I guess today's stream isn't going to be super long either, so yeah, there will be room for questions. Apart from that, yes, I did mention I will be showing some books which I buy. Well, a friend recommended this, the Pentium Chronicles, the People, Passion and Politics Behind Intel's Landmark Chip, or chips actually. And this is rather thin. I don't know, maybe it's 200 pages-ish. Yeah, not even 200 pages, 180. So, and it's supposed to be not super technical and fun to read, so I'm going to actually, I'm probably going to read it. It looks fun. So yeah, that's actually the only book I received last week. So that's it. Now, moving on to the our usual stuff. Let me just switch the macros on my keyboard. This is amazing. KrzaQ actually published a blog post on his blog. So yeah, you know, I always joke that, yeah, this is KrzaQ's blog, dev.krzaQ.cc, you should check it out. He writes about C++, and then you see like 2017. And no, there is a blog post now. You should totally check it out, especially that it's about a really good book. Game Engine Black Book is written by Fabian, and it's just amazing. I have it on my shelf as well. So yeah, check out the review if you think you might like it. Totally support Fabian by buying it. So there we have it. Next one, I actually wanted to give shout outs to Robert, because Robert has a YouTube channel and he started to RISC V CPU, which you can actually see, as in, for example, in his first video he shows this is actually a register, and he puts it into, you know, the CPU board, I guess. That's the idea, and you can see like the state of a register, looking at the LEDs and so on, and then you will actually, I guess the idea is to be able to see the whole CPU, which isn't in silicon, but it's actually on, I don't know, the breadboard or whatever board he will use. So I'm going to give you a link to it because it looks like a really fun project. I actually did subscribe to his channel, and I'm really looking forward to more of the updates. So there's that, and this is, I guess, related to the topic of today. But first of all, there's a question. Can you tell something about automated bug hunting, for example, in the DARPA Grant Challenge? That's a question from Exploiter. Yeah, I guess I can say a little about it. So the DARPA challenge was really, it was on a simplified model of computers, simplified in a way that it was still x86 CPU running Linux, but the Linux was actually really modified, and the only interface to the system from the process head was I think like 5 syscalls or something like that. You know, the basic ones like write, read, maybe something else like 3 or 4 more like exit, and that was all it had. So like similar approach to what Robert a few streams ago described in Secomp. Yeah, and this already simplifies things a lot. I think there's also some memory management there. Now, the idea behind the challenge was that only bots were allowed to play, and a bot would receive a link, basically a link, well, not really a link. It would receive a binary of an application, and it would have to generate an exploit, like analyze the application, find a bug, generate an exploit, generate a patch for this, and submit it to the server. And the server, once it received all the basically all the submissions from each bot, it would run a set of tests and see if, for example, the exploit actually did work. Now the exploit here is pretty interesting because the exploit actually was, you were given a set of APIs which were either like you could do a C library or Python library around it as you liked, or you could write them down in an XML file in like super easy cases, and they would be executed. And what the server did, it actually executed the exploit based on this API, and as an exploit, what you wanted to achieve is not full shell code that creates a reverse shell, which is the normal case in CTFs, for example, but it was enough to prove that you control EIP and enter register. It was a set of things. Either you should control EIP and a register, or I think you can leak memory from any address which is provided by the exploit API. This is, of course, to, I guess, simplify the model even further so that bots can play. Now, the way the bots worked is they usually did a couple of things. I guess you can read the write-ups of all the teams which participated in the DARPA challenge, but they used 2 ways. First way was fuzzing. And, well, I guess we talked a lot on these streams about fuzzing, so if you're interested, just look at my archived videos. So I'm not going to dwell too much into it. The other approach is like concolic execution style-ish. Basically, it's like this. You take a binary, and this is simplified what I say now. You take a binary, you somewhat determine where the inputs, the outputs, and then you try to basically find a state which is problematic, as in which allows the input to override a return address, because that would give you EIP control. And if you to find that input, you actually find the state where the override would happen, and then you ask the question, what sort of input do I need to actually reach this state? And you can actually look at the, for example, on assembly instructions, translate them into a mathematical equation and try to solve that equation using SMT or SAT solvers. This of course takes some time, but as in, CPU cycles, but in the end you might actually be able to find a given set of inputs which actually allow you to reach and control this EIP, which is written on the stack, right, and then popped from the stack during a return. And Anger, for example, I think was created for DARPA challenge. I might be mistaken here, but if Anger wasn't, then other similar tools were like that. So if you're interested, then just look at Anger. It's ANGR. and it's actually a Python library which pretty much allows you to do what I just described in a somewhat automated fashion. And yeah, and when the bots were, you know, given a set of binaries, for each binary it was supposed to create an exploit, and the exploit, well, to find the bugs we could use the fuzzer and this approach, the second approach I described, like SMT sat solvers, symbolic concolic execution, whatever comes to your mind. And yeah, and generate also the patch for it, and then submit everything, and it was graded. And if I remember correctly, some people from PPP won. They actually had a team of their own. I don't remember the name of the team, but I know some PPP people were involved. And yeah, and then the winning bot also played the DEF CON CTF finals as one of the teams, and it was quite funny. The bot was actually finished last, but so yeah, humans dominated. But the question is, why really? Because there was some problem with the bot was not receiving some feedback from the server which it was supposed to receive. There was some confusion about it, and the bot wasn't running at 100%. So yeah, I guess the question of like if the bot would actually be higher than one of the teams remains really unanswered. Yeah. Oh, Jordan says that anger was around beforehand, but a good chunk of work that occurred on it was a result of CGC, Cyber Grand Challenge from DARPA. Thank you, Jordan. Is fuzzing a lobotomy of a program? No, lobotomy sounds smarter than fuzzing. Okay, so I guess let's move on to the actual topic of today's stream, which is competitions. And I'm going to mostly talk about programming competitions, almost exclusively about programming competitions, and mostly about game development competitions, because I took part in mostly in such kind of competitions. I am maybe going to mention algorithmic competitions a little, but I never, well, I took part in several, but I never had any good results in them. Just algorithm itself, it's something I consider to be a tool. I am not super fascinated by them. So I never acquired a taste for the competitions, you know, like Top Coder and so on. I'm probably going to mention sometimes CTFs as, but yeah, I will focus on programming competitions. Now, I guess I can show you some of my entries, and by my, I actually mean our entries, because I guess I mostly prefer team competitions, where there are a couple of people taking part and trying to program something, right? Be it game jams or like hackathons where you create games, or game dev compos, how it was called back in the days on the Polish game dev scene. And yeah, so yeah, I'm going to show you some entries, tell you maybe some story behind it, and then I'll jump to the tips. So let's move here. I guess if you go to vexillium.org, it's you can see the images. I will give you the link as well. Now, so let's go from the end. This isn't actually the first game we created. So I will try to quickly find on my backup disk a screenshot or two from the first entries into compos I had. Shouldn't take long, I kinda know where is it. It's obviously in like backup, alt C, alt E, and I'm not making this up. This is how the directories go: backup, alt D, alt E, and then compose. So, do I have a screenshot of this? No, I don't have a screenshot of this. That's fine. It's actually, I think, third on that compo. So let's go with this one. Perfect. This is a compo from my game from 2003. It was a 24-hour game development competition organized on one of game dev forum/IRC community, and the topic was in these compos usually it was time limited, so in this case 24 hours, and there's also a topic which is given, but the topic is pretty. It's not like you have only this kind of game you can make. It's just like a general idea, and in this case the general idea was race. So race as in racing, as in maybe cars, maybe whatever else racing. Now, this game was made in, it's actually in 2K2, in 2002, so that was 16 years ago. And yeah, this is how the game looked like. It was programmed in C++, and it had I would say it had a pretty cool driving model. There, you know, tracks left by the car, there was some smoke, and the map was pretty decently big. It was racing against time, so I guess one of the things which already is a tip here is be creative with the rules a little, but still within their boundaries. So I decided not to make any AI for it, any artificial intelligence, just to make you know, race against time. Why? Because it's easier, and creating good AI for this kind of games does take time. Now, I think like 12 people participated in the end, which is quite a decent amount for small communities. Well, small, the community had a couple of hundred of people. I actually won this one, which is super funny because I barely knew any C++ back then, to the extent that I didn't know how to use pointers and how they worked, and I learned pointers like a year after that. So if you look into the code, and I actually do have the codes here, so let's look at it. This is the code. You can find, if I remember correctly, as you can see, the code quality is, sorry, I'm going to make this a little bigger. The code quality is, well, we don't talk about code quality here. There is no code quality. What I'm looking for is, yeah, here we go. Find first three. Now, you saw the smoke, right? And the tracks. And the smoke and the tracks actually disappeared after a while. So the tracks were soundtracks, like 100 tracks or so, and then they would disappear. Now, the usual way you would go about it is you would create a linked list, right? And you would, at the beginning, well, you would push down the list the new tracks, which you create, the marks, you know, after the tires, which you create after the car, and then when they basically should disappear, you just pop them from the list, right? And so you basically pop from the front and not to the back, or the other way around. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it would be to basically do just a ring buffer. A ring buffer here would be beautiful. That being said, to create linked list, I didn't know STL, I didn't know pointers, so I couldn't create linked list, and I didn't understand pointers. I was coming from BASIC, from Pascal. You don't really use too much pointers in these languages. You can use pointers in Pascal, but I didn't. And so I created this invention, which is basically, it finds the first three as an empty smoke element in an array, and then it fills it, which is a stupid way to do it, but it worked, and it still got me the first place. So what I guess what I'm trying to say here is that if you're wondering if you should take part in a competition, then totally do take part, regardless of what is your skill level. Because if I could win a compo with 12 other, like 11 other way better programmers than I was at the time, then it's totally possible regardless of your actual programming level. In the end, in compos, it doesn't really boil down to programming skill. It boils down to idea and execution and a couple of other things. So yeah, this is a good takeaway to take from here. Now, another thing to take away from this code is ugly. It's, I don't know, 2000, almost 2000 lines in one file. There is also a header file. The header file has, well, it doesn't almost have anything. yeah, there's almost nothing here. It's 100 lines. And also a library to create the OpenGL window, which I use, and that's it. So, and this is something which looks really, really bad. If this was production code, I would say, dear me in the past, please actually go and learn proper style, proper coding, and try to write your code in an elegant and readable way, because that way you will not make bugs. But that rule does not apply to competitions, especially time-limited competitions. Maybe if you don't have time or the time limit is actually like 1 month or 2 months, then that's fine. But if you have 24 hours or like 48 hours or 12 hours or whatnot, then all the rules about proper code writing, proper code design, you take them and you put them in the trash, because you just don't have time for that stuff. That stuff is awesome in production code, totally use it in your products, but when you're writing a game for a time-limited competition or whatever for a time-limited competition, you must focus on creating the code which does what you want as fast as possible. And yeah, and sorry comments or sorry properly created, well-optimized functions, that's just, they just don't work. For example, if you'd like to create a nice set of class and inheritance from them, it will take time, and at the same time, somebody writing in C with classes, as you know, as some people call mild programming style during competitions, is like C++, but you actually use mostly structured programming. That's it. It's just way faster to create the code. There are a couple of other, like two other related tips here, is that one is usually debug mode is your friend. Do not compile your code in release mode, because it will probably crash and you do not have time to debug. And in debug mode, it's, yeah, there are some assumptions made by the compiler, especially that's true for Visual C++, that help to stabilize your application. Also, sometimes forget about deinitialization. For example, if you open a file, then maybe you don't have to close it. If you know that, oh, during the runtime of this game, which I have only 12 hours to create, I will probably not run out of file descriptor, then yeah, just don't write fclose something, because you don't have time for that. Obviously, if you are using like C++, like constructs, which automatically get rid of the file when it's no longer needed, of a handle, then that's fine. That's obviously fine. The idea here is to not to write too much code, because even if you type really fast, it still takes you time. Going further is, yeah, sometimes you also don't need to free memory. And if you know that you will never allocate more than, I don't know, 1 gigabyte currently, right, then just don't free memory, don't bother with it. If you had a buffer overflow somewhere, then a free might actually crash your program, and you don't want to be stuck debugging. So on competitions, perhaps think about, if it's okay, if it will not crash, think about not freeing memory. So as you can see, things that you normally do in production code, in production quality code, which are super important, sometimes you just don't need them in time-limited competitions. Yeah, so okay, let's maybe not look more at this code. It's not great. Just one note here is that the graphics isn't mine. The graphics was downloaded from some free game art site, which I don't remember, but I think like the community actually shared some links. So, that being said, okay, what happened? Yeah, I guess this is the second tip. Is okay, so there are actually a couple of branched tips here. Oh, this is the second screenshot from the game. So the second tip is or I'm not sure if it's the second or whatever. Nth tip is be sure to actually know what kind of competitions you are taking part in. for example, in this competition, I knew that it was time limited, 12 hours. It didn't matter what language did I write, but game engines were, and like RPG makers, game makers were banned. You couldn't use them. It was about coding your own engine. The topic was given, right? But there were a couple of things which you downloaded from the internet. And this is super important because it takes time to do cool graphics, and if you are not a graphic artist, could do under the rules. For example, you didn't have to create your own graphics, you could use graphics downloaded from the internet. You're a programmer, for example, and only a programmer. There are, of course, programmers who are graphic artists as well. But if you have no skill in fast drawing, then perhaps just download the graphics on a proper license from the internet. For example, OpenGameArt is one of the sites which has gameart.com. I think it's .com. No, OpenGameArt. Maybe it's .org. Yeah, here we go. Here you go. Yeah. So, yeah, it's basically a site with free art for games, and you can browse, like, for example, 2D, and you need I don't know, what do we need? Let's say we need some, for example, castle tiles. Here we go. And this is like a tile set which is ready to use, created by somebody who actually knows what they are doing. And that creates really nice graphics. You don't have to draw anything, you just have to probably credit the person, look at the license, it's super important to be fair to the author of it, and just credit, say that this graphic was made by someone. If you remember my competition, the Summer Game Dev Challenge, which was almost a year ago now, I actually choose some art from this site, and so I said everyone has to use this, and let's see what games you create, right? And the graphic artist was actually really happy that if you're following him on Twitter, he was like really happy that somebody used his art, because this is why he made it public, right? Why he put it on a permissive license so that other people can use it. Let's just close it. And the license you can usually find, here. Here is, for example, CC by 3.0. That means it's common creative. By means you have to credit the author, so say in your readme file and so on, just that this person created it. And here's a link to their website. Here's a link to where I downloaded the graphics from. Usually, like, give credit where credit is due. That's a good approach. It doesn't have NC letters here, which is even better. NC is non-commercial, so we couldn't use it for commercial games. This graphic, which is on the screen, could be used for commercial games. So yeah, totally look at the site and just download what you need, because it's way faster. You as a programmer have to focus on the game engine anyway. So yeah, this basically brings us to a next question, is when you're taking part in a competition, how is your game or whatever other program is that you are creating, how is it judged? Is it judged by, and who is it judged by? And also who is going to test it? For example, if in the competition which I showed you a screenshot of, like this one, right? The games were judged by the participants. So the participants basically, after every game was submitted, downloaded the package of the games, and they said, oh, this is my favorite, this is my second favorite, and this is like the third favorite. And then, well, the game with the best scores from everyone won. So, so that's one way of judging. The other way of judging is there's a judge or a panel of judges, right? Who say, yeah, this game is good, and this is top one, and this is the case actually in my competitions, right? Especially, well, that was true for both the Summer and Winter Game Dev Challenge, where I was judging the games and I was deciding, oh, this game is cool, this game is maybe needs some more work. So this is also important, but this is semi-important. The more important thing is who is going to present the game, because especially that's true for like offline hackathons where you go somewhere and you you have to create the game on site. There was a competition like that on a game dev conference I usually attended some years ago. I think I was in like 5 or 6 editions with my team. And there was always a competition, 7 hours, 4 people in a team. And after 7 hours, you would get to present your game. And then it was judged by some judges, and well, depending on the year, it kind of changed. But the important part here is, are you the one presenting, or will the judge actually play the game by themselves? If you are the one presenting, then that means you can get away with a couple of things. For example, you can get away with not making a proper game menu, just like hooking up that F1 is the title screen, F2 for the game is actually the gameplay. So when you're presenting, you just know that, and you don't need to waste 15 minutes or half an hour to create a proper menu. And I guess if we go to my screenshots yet again, let's maybe go here. Yeah, this was a funny platform game. I think we had the like fourth or third place, maybe second place. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Yeah, here we didn't have any menu. It was this screen, and then we had to press F2 to actually move to the gameplay itself. Now, this is okay, and you can get away with that if you are presenting the game. But if there is a judge who will actually try to play the game, they will get stuck on it, because how would they know that they have to press a random key now to actually start playing? They won't. So in that case, you actually might want to put some effort into the menu, the tutorial, and whatnot, because that does give you a nice effect of the game being complete and actually well working. So if we move to yet another game, I don't know. Yeah, for example, this one, Magus Ex Machina, created by me and Yuru on one of the Gamejams in Zurich. And yeah, this actually had a proper menu, because we weren't sure who was going to judge it. We also had 48 hours, that gives you some more time for final polishes. The graphic was downloaded from the internet, and yeah, this was the game itself. I'm pretty happy with that game. We didn't win, but I'm pretty happy with that game. And yeah, this was part of a tutorial which would say what to do. So it makes the game feel more complete, but again, this is only needed if you are not the one presenting the game. So yeah, this is just a small tip to maybe you will be able to get away with something, wing something, and have some more time, or actually making the game fun and playable. Yes, so moving forward, what else do we have here? So I wanted to show you this site, opengameart.org. But apart from that, a very important kind of sites is a site where you can find color themes. So color theme generator. And there are like a gazillion sites like that. I'm just going to pick random ones, maybe this one. Yeah. What this does is it allows you to select a color. For example, this one. Oh, this one is nice because it looks kind of like my theme, I guess. And yeah, change something more, and it gives you actually a ready-to-use color theme. Now, this is a fast and cheap way to not think about what colors should I choose for my UI, for the font, for showing the health bars and so on, and actually having a really decent color set. So, well, if somebody is going to judge your game or your program or whatever, they're going to first look with their eyes, right? They're going to say, oh, this actually looks really nice, or this doesn't look good. So be sure to, especially if this is important with games, but not only, be sure that the game which you submit looks nice, looks elegant, looks fancy. And you don't have to be, a master designer to do it, but there are some tricks like using ready-made graphics or using sites like this one to be able to come up with a proper solution. Also, try to, when making, I don't know, the UI and so on, try to inspire yourself with just looking at other games or other UI elements created in the world. I mean, there are, 10,000 games already created, and some of them had really cool UI. If you remember some of them, then maybe you can check out and inspire yourself with it. Do not copy it, because copying is bad, but being inspired is okay. Being inspired as in taking an inspiration. Sorry, my English is terrible today, as usual. Okay, now, another way to do it is actually to get a graphic artist on your team. And this is what, due to random reasons, happened to me. There was a person who I met in like real life, and I said, yeah, I do like game programming, and he said, yeah, I do graphic artists, and I said, yeah, I'm really good. Well, I wasn't, I was decent. And he said, yeah, I'm really good too, and we're like, yeah, really, I'm not sure you are good. So we decided to actually take part in a competition, and we won it. So yeah, and we stuck for like the next 10 or so competitions, taking part together usually. This is the game, the game art he made. This was actually a test run for us, or actually it happened after the first time we took part, doesn't matter. Yeah, just like super simple graphics, created from scratch during when I was coding. He was making the graphics. If you watched the Polish live stream, then I had a 16-hour live stream with this person, with Sebastian, and we created during the 16 hours a multiplayer game which barely worked, but it worked in the end. So yeah, this is one of the first arts he created for a game. It was just a simple, you know, like Mortal Kombat like beat 'em up. I think we created it in 12 hours. Then this was, Yume was actually, this was 24 hours, and it was pretty cool because he created multiple layers of background, and it was moving all around. There were things which were more 3D in style. Well, but I think that was actually 3D, and elements which were not 3D. That was a really good game. That was, yeah, the first time we took part in a competition together and we won. This was another game which I already showed you on the conference which we went to. This was this is a way to kinda wing some things, as in yeah, one of the things I learned about programming competitions is do not create 3D games, create only 2D games, because if you are time limited, you have like 7 hours or 12 hours, you will be stuck with a lot of things which normally you do when coding 3D games. And like, I don't know, proper perspective or collision in 3D, or like some other stuff like physics in 3D. Adding just one dimension actually complicates a lot of things. Now, sometimes you can, like, it's best to focus on 2D games in such competitions. This is what I've learned, and also what other people learned. That being said, sometimes you can just wing it. Here is a funny example where the models are 3D, and yeah, we had some more time actually, so the models could have been created and be 3D. But the background, this is actually 2 dimensions. It was created in a 3D program. It was rendered to a 2D bitmap, and then it was like basically in some editor or even without it, I did something like this. This is the collision map. So the model couldn't go through the collision map due to, well, this boundary, not visible on the screen, of course, but it was there. So, sorry, in the program. So, yeah, actually, when I chatted later with the judges and with the participant, they thought that the background is full 3D and is being rendered real time, and that it looks really awesome, but no, that's just a way to cheat 3D, and only the models were 3D. But I wouldn't recommend doing this approach. It actually is quite funny to try to get the models point in the right direction and move in the proper direction. Yeah. Then moving forward, this was actually a 3D game, but it was super easy. So, so yeah, it was just a tunnel. The idea was that there is a tunnel and there are these, well, rotating circles which had actually parts cut out, and you could go all the way around the tunnel and just move it. It was inspired on some other game, I just don't remember what it was, but yeah, it was like 3rd place on the competition. Didn't win because we ran out of time to actually finish it. This was actually fun. It was a 2D game. Again, the graphics is created in all these games which I show by exactly the same person, by Sebastian Bexa. And this was Also 7 hours, 4 people, me plus 2 programmers plus KrzaQ for graphics. It was a portal shoot 'em up game, as in each of the players could create a portal, and if they jump into one, they jump out of the other. I guess you know the drill, you know the portal game. That being said, if you shoot through a portal, it also like goes the other way around, right? And yeah, and you just like jumped around, shoot yourself, and if you fall into lava, you die. Simple game. 7 hours again, graphic make it from scratch. Now the trick is that it isn't multiplayer. It was, you needed actually 2 keyboards and, no, 1 keyboard but 2 mice. You connected 2 mice to a PC. Yes, that's possible if you're wondering. For some of you it might be obvious, but for some of you, no. And each of the players had their own cursor, and using the cursor, you know, and your own mouse, you could actually aim. So that was like the thing which made the game stand out. But oh, they actually have 2 mice. This is interesting. It's quite easy, obviously, because there is a library we use SDL mice, which is exactly for it. And but that was unexpected. The judges were really happy about it, and apart from that, the game was pretty well made. So if you have a good idea and you have good execution, decent execution, this game had some bugs, then yeah, then that's a good thing. If you need a selling point. But yeah, I guess like having a good idea for the game you're creating, why will it be fun is and playable. That's a pretty important thing. Yeah, it was called Teledev, and these are the people behind it. I already showed you this. Jet Escape was yet another game for the same conference just next year. It was also a 2D game. Also, all the graphics were created on site during the 7 hours. It's usually like this, but when the coders are still coding the engine and the game itself, KrzaQ, our artist, was already finished and was doing something else with the graphics. So it's, I guess, easier and faster to create the graphics than to create code for the game. Now, so is it 2 mice or is it 2 mouses? It's actually both, it seems. I've checked in the dictionary some time ago, and both forms are fine. Now, this was a game which has my favorite approach to it, as in I actually used combined 3D and 2D as an OpenGL plus 2D rendering on a texture. It's the way I really like, because what you can do is you can also do some tricks there, and one of the tricks I really like is something I call the fire buffer. A fire buffer is basically a texture which is normally invisible, but if you render to it, the thing on it starts to burn with a fire effect. The fire effect is super simple to code. It's like one loop with, and it gives you really nice flaming effects like here, and the smoke is here. So if, for example, our player gets hit with a bullet, as you can see here, it starts, we just render something to the fire buffer, and the fire buffer creates this nice flame effect to it, and we don't have to do anything else. So it's a nice and cheap way to create fire effects and render them. I really like this approach. Now, this approach is actually described on my blog, but I think on the Polish side. Let me just look for it. Compo. Yeah, sorry, it's on the Polish side, but maybe you can just read. Maybe you can just, you know, read through Google Translate or something. This was for another game, but again we used the same idea, and here is how the scene is actually created. And yeah, this is the fire plane, the fire buffer. You basically have a grayscale buffer, then a fire palette which has some, this is for transparency, and you render it on it, and if something explodes or something, you just write on that palette, and then everything magically happens. You can look in my blog post for on it, like for details on it, how it works. Yeah, oh sorry, I guess there's an animation here as well, how it looks like. Yeah, so I guess when taking part in the competitions, you can learn tricks like that too. The game by the way described is one of the last games we did for a compo. It was also a two-player game, like a defense, where you have a base to defend, and you use scorched tanks-like physics to, you know, select the angle and the power and you shoot. And there was a lot of hydraulic-like looking zombies going to your base and starting to attack it. And here, if you actually like destroyed the ground because the ground was destroyable, you would get to the lava. Now that was a side effect of something, because I forgot to remove the last line of a plane buffer when animating the flame. It's a pretty obvious mistake if you know the algorithm behind it. And yeah, so the ground started burning, and we thought, hey, that's actually a nice effect. Let's leave it in. Yeah. So there's that. Let's go. Some more tips. Yeah, one important thing is, especially if somebody is going to judge your game, is again in time limited entries, is the game should be complete. And by complete, I don't mean like, I don't know, 10 maps, tutorials and everything. No, what I mean, it has to be playable. You have to be able to die in the game, as in, you know, lose the game, and you have to be able to win the game. And this is the most important things. If your game is just like a tech demo of an engine, so you can move around, but you can't really lose or can't really dive, and that isn't really good, and the judges will probably call you out on it. So yeah, whatever you do, be sure that you can die in the game or win the game. The winning isn't super important, because you can always say that, oh, survive the longest you can, and the longer you can survive, the better. That's your high score, actually. So that's one way to actually win it. And another thing is, remember about music and sound. This is the thing which people neglect the most, and I also neglected the most. And like half of the games I showed you, there probably wasn't any sound. Because when you focus on graphics, right, and on all the cool effects and so on, but yeah, the sound is similar to graphics in the way that you can actually go to some websites and download free sound samples, which you can use for both commercial and non-commercial use, for example, on the Common Creative license. So do it, use it, and get familiar with libraries which allow you to actually play the sample back. Sorry. And yeah, and music is a little more complicated. Usually it's okay to not use music, and if competition rules actually allow you to use third-party music, which, you know, is okay from a licensing and copyright point of view, then try to do it. There were also, on the competitions I took part, some people who were like, for example, both a talented programmer, a graphic artist, and they could also do music, and that was just an overkill. But yeah, I know at least one person on the Polish scene to be able to do it, and if you can do it, that's really amazing then, totally. Okay, so I guess let's go through the questions now. I'm going to think a little more about what random tips I can give you, especially I'll move into the, I guess, size limited competitions next, because that's also interesting. So questions. Well, there are actually 8 questions. One team wrote the bot in Python. How could they pull that off? Isn't it super slow? So okay, it's like this. Depending on what exactly are the rules of a given competition, you might get away with creating games in or whatever in slower languages. For games, personally, I use C++ because it's fast. I know I will not have to optimize almost anything. I can just use brute force algorithms for most, which are super fast to implement for most of the things, because C++ lets me get away with it. Now, Python isn't as fast, so and like same with Java and so on. If you can run, like tell the judges how to run your game, or you are presenting yourself, then do use a JIT engine, like for example PyPy for Python, right? Java, I guess, uses one by default. Yeah, and the other thing is, in Python, Python is slow, but it's not like super mega slow, like, I don't know, brainfuck or something. So it's still a decent language in terms of speed. It's like 10 times slower, maybe 100 times slower than C++, but it's still fast enough to do a lot of things. So especially if you can use, like, for example, graphic libraries, right, for some things, and the graphic library is actually coded in C, and you just, to move an image, you just call a library function, and the library is in C. That's actually a really fast operation. And in Python you can express yourself, as in create some stuff faster than in C++. Of course, in C++ with the modern STL library you can do almost the same things as in Python, but in Python is usually less writing. Yeah, so Python is slow but not super slow, so that's my take on it. So maybe that's why the I guess the best advisor, your question was also really about the CGC in context of CGC. In context of CGC, that should be fine. And I'm pretty sure if they use any fuzzer or if they use any like SMT and SAD libraries, these things are not in Python. The backend was still in C, even if they were invoked from Python. So I think that's also another way to wing it. But I wouldn't, in time-limited competitions, do not create complex stuff like C code for a Python library. That will just backfire, because it's unless you know everything about it. If you just try to create it and you have zero experience, you will probably lose a lot of time. Okay, Przemysław writes, when I sent my laptop to the support, there was that area in the touch screen. Today, after replacement on the new screen, there's also that area, but in a different place. How is it possible? I don't know, maybe they have some problems with the cables, and the cable is not properly connected, and one of the cables is not doesn't have connectivity, and that's why some area doesn't work. It's pretty interesting. I don't know, but it's a question to ask to for example, the hardware support. On February 2018, Patch Tuesday, there was a bug in kernel that could enable the ordinary exe file to run with kernel privileges. That bug was reported by Yuru. What do you think about it? With kernel privileges, I need to ask him about the bug. I don't know the bug, in all honesty, so I don't have any opinion. But from your description, it sounds like a super awesome bug. And super weird as well. Yeah, I'll ask Euro about it. That's an interesting thing, but yeah, I don't know about it, so no info from me, sorry. So how do you do pointers in modern C++? In modern C++, you almost don't do pointers unless you need to write some low-level-ish code or library code. And because I guess the question here is, what did you use pointers for in the first place? Well, why do you need pointers for? Well, you need pointers for allocating memory, right? So malloc needed pointers, but in modern C++ you can use like unique pointer, for example, which is a special type of class which makes sure that the pointer is will be deallocated when the time comes when it lives is near an end. So that's one thing. The other thing, well, if you weren't allocating any like one object or something, but you were allocated a buffer of bytes, then instead of doing that, you can use, for example, STL vector, which is a really good substitute for that, and it also doesn't require any pointers. So you can, I guess, go like that, and you'll find out that for almost all use cases of pointers, there's actually a substitution for it. But you don't have to use it. You can use a safer mechanism which doesn't make you operate on the raw memory itself, and you don't really use pointers. You can read more about it in, for us, actually a talk about modern C++ from the creator of the language. I guess look for modern C++ and the name of the creator and YouTube, and you should be able to find it. And there are like a lot of tips like that, how to use what instead of using pointers. What do you think about the fact that Linus did not have so good opinion about C++, especially in kernel development? What do I think about the fact? Is it a fact? I don't know. Yeah, I like, if you're watching my streams, you know, but I wouldn't recommend C++ for kernel development, because kernels are somewhat low level, and you probably want to do memory management in a different way than the C++ model of memory management is being done. So yeah, I actually think that I agree, it might not be so good for kernel development. On the other hand, you can get away with it, but you do have to use the language in a specific way. That's all I can say, I guess. Why should I care about game dev? As a general self-development, or does it allow to develop particular set of skills? Good question, fair question. I don't know. I mean, I care about game dev because I like game dev, and that's the only true answer, which I know. If you want to create games or care about game dev, then do it. If you don't care about it, then maybe you can look at it as self-development and try it for like 1 game or 2 games. You probably will not get stuck with it. Yeah, I just like it. I mean, I always thought I would be a game developer, and I turned to security path when I was already on the university. So yeah, it's a game dev, and like security is like one of my 2 favorite IT topics, I guess. From Zezo, any of these games in multiplayer, any of these games in multiplayer game? If so, how did you handle it? I mean the game server. So, okay, so it's a good question. In 1 case or 2 cases, it was actually hot seat, which means, 2 people in front of one computer, which is one way to get away with multiplayer. 1 game where, actually the game which we created during the 16-hour stream was, that was a multiplayer game with a server. The server, it used a client in JavaScript, which was coded by KrzaQ, the graphic artist. He's actually one of the people I know who can do both art and programming, and he actually has like done a professional career in both. So yeah, he coded the client, and I coded a WebSocket based server, and it was terrible because I didn't expect so many people on the stream to actually want to test it, and there were race conditions all around. But using my own tips from today, like removing all the freeze and so on, I actually managed to stabilize it like near the end of 16 hours. So I would actually not recommend doing multiplayer games apart from hot seat. Hot seat is okay, but apart from that, on time-limited competitions, that's a thing which can easily backfire. So yeah, getting multiplayer right is hard. If it's turn-based, that's easier. If it's real-time, then yeah, it's really hard to get it right. Could I give a link to the 16-hour stream? I can give you the link, but the link is I was chatting there in Polish, so you might not like it, but let's find it. It's so let's switch to the desktop so you can view something what I'm doing. User, sorry. Okay, videos, and yeah, here. I guess this was the first one. So here you go. Yeah, let's maybe check the last part. So 9, I think this was the last one. Okay, let's see if there's a game. Yeah, so yeah, this is the game, how it looked like in the end after 16 hours, and actually there were 4 people at the same time, and as you can see, it still is a little buggy, but I think it was tested at the time of recording with 1 server, 1 process, with 100 people trying to play in 4 people rooms, like 25 4 people rooms or so. So yeah, I seriously expected only like 5 people to come on the stream, and I said like, yeah, I don't need thread synchronization. In that case, it was just like not there won't be any race conditions, and in the end it backfired spectacularly. How to debug computer game? The same way you debug any other software. And one thing here is that in case you are looking at, like, I don't know, like an OpenGL or DirectX game, there are also debuggers which are specific to a given API that allow you, for example, to extract shader or real-time play with a shader and so on. So look for software like that, like OpenGL debugger or DirectX debugger or graphical API debugger. Put that in Google and try to look for it. Can you give us a quick example where to use template generics in games? Apart from the usual, which is, you know, containers, which you usually use templates there. I guess it depends on your design. I'd probably use some templates around networking, if any, but probably not, and the containers, as I mentioned, but probably not too much else. So generics and templates are a tool which you use as at a specific but rather small point. I don't know if there's any large area of game development which you say, oh, you always use templates there. I don't think that's the case. So it's hard to me to give you another example than what I've mentioned. Why don't you have real examples of these games, only screens? I probably have them somewhere on my drive. I'm not sure if a lot of them would work, because last time I compiled it was, for example, in 2002. So we can try, and I'm also not sure if it won't just go full screen and screw my desktop layout and so on. So I'd prefer not to do it without checking it out first. So why aren't you searching for vulns in games? I actually did that some time ago. I even had a not so good conference presentation about it. I think in 2010, 2009, something like that, maybe 2008. Anyway, yeah, games are full of bugs, and they are not known for security, and there are some people who I think I know one person. Just let me check if I get his name right. Yes, here we go. I think this is the person. Luigi Ariema. That was a person who was specializing in game bugs. I'm not sure if that's, it's I'm not sure if he's still handling it, but back in the day he was doing quite a lot of it, and there were like a lot of games he found bugs in. That being said, yeah, I also looked at like Quake 3 and StarCraft and StarCraft 1 and found some bugs there. Nothing super terrible. I didn't look for too long. It was quite easy to always find bugs in network games and so on. So if you're interested in an easy target, totally look up games. Especially like Battlefield 3 had, or was it? Yeah, I think that was both Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 had actually a web browser plugin for the game, so you would select the game and connect to the server which you like inside the web browser, and I think Tavis or Monody actually found that due to this you can get like remote code execution. Just the fact that you have this plugin installed. This Przemysław writes, I guess in the context of his previous question, this bug was such a privilege escalation that allowed the app to run arbitrary code with kernel privileges. So I guess like that means that's pretty normal for privilege escalations, I guess, but at some point, well, not all of them, right? There are two groups of local privilege escalations. One is you actually attack service which is running with more privileges than you, for example, running with the system user. The system is the equivalent of root on Linux. Root on Linux, but on Windows. Or the other way around is you attack the kernel or Win32k or some driver and you actually get kernel privileges, and then you can switch the executable which you're running to a different user, and the user is usually system because you want to have full privileges. So I think that was one of these kind of bugs, but I need to ask you which bug did they actually fix. If that multiplayer game you did the server for is open source, can we get a link? It's on my GitHub, probably. So GitHub, stream, and somewhere here, I guess. It should be somewhere here. I'm pretty sure it is open source, but I'm not really sure where I have it. Anyway, somewhere on my YouTube channel, under the videos, there should be a link to it, one way or the other. Okay, that's the end of questions. So, going back to a different kind of competitions is when you are not really time limited, maybe a little, but you are size limited. So what to do when you are size limited? For example, on my last, on the winter challenge, I said that, oh, please create a game which is in JavaScript and only one HTML file, and it's 20 kilobytes total, everything, art, music, graphics, code, 20 kilobytes, one file. Yeah, and for some people who did competitions like that in the past, actually is like, whoa, 20k, I don't know what I'm going to do with that amount of space, that's actually a lot. And on some other people who don't have experience, I guess, with that, the reaction was more of a line like, you're crazy, well, that's not possible. Yeah, so I guess most of you know Krieger, right? Krieger is, I believe, a German... Krieger, I don't know how to write it. Okay. I absolutely don't remember how you write Krieger. 100 KB game, maybe. Yeah, .Krieger. Here we go. Yeah, this is a game which looks like this. Sorry for the quality, that's what Wikipedia actually has. And it's 100 kilobytes. Yeah, like it was on a 96 kilobyte game compo, and you can create a game that looks like this, and it's actually like a clone of Quake and it's playable. So it turns out you can do actually a lot of stuff with a limited space. And again, it's 96 kilobytes, it's not 96 megabytes, and it's not 96 gigabytes. You know, Doom, the newest Doom version is like 75 gigabytes. So no, this is 96 kilobytes. It would fit on a floppy disk like 10 times over, or like 15 times over even. So, how to approach creating such a thing? So it depends how deep do you want to go into it, and what is your actual language, because it's super important in terms of languages. I guess I can give you the link to Krieger. Like, download it, play it, it's playable. It killed my, like, when it came out, it just didn't run on my computer because I didn't have a good enough specs. It had nothing to do with the size. Anyway, back to the topic, because it's from 2004. Back to the topic. So, if you are, for example, let's talk about my winter compo, right? You had to create a game which is in JavaScript, or actually HTML file which could contain JavaScript. So the question is here how to make it shorter, and there are a couple of ways to do it. One obvious way is, and the thing you should start with is see what other people did in the past, because minimizing JavaScript is not a new topic. So look for minimizers, look for code compression, maybe code obfuscation by compression. There are actually libraries for that, and see if you can use any of them. And also think that, oh, my game is probably going to take, how much space will it take? Like if you say 16K plus like 1-2K, then you're fine within the limit. Like, just grab a library and focus on the gameplay, because that might be more important. If you think that, oh, my game is going to take 40K and the minimizer is going to get it to 25K, then you're approaching kinda uncharted territory where you have to start thinking really hard to, maybe you should create your own thing which minimizes it. Now, how to do it? Again, look for things which other people did. One thing which you can do in case of JavaScript and HTML is actually abuse PNG compression. The way you do it is you create an HTML PNG polyglot, so one file which is both proper HTML and proper PNG. You can just do it creating a PNG file with a comment section. In the comment section you have HTML with JavaScript. Now the browsers would load it as an HTML file and it would start executing the HTML file, because other things are garbage. It would just display the garbage but wouldn't like ignore it. So yeah, and then what you do in the HTML stub, you actually load again the page, the PNG HTML as an image. And then it's loaded as an image. And in the image what you have is you have some garbage looking data. But the garbage looking data is actually all your code, all your resources, everything, which is nicely compressed thanks to PNG algorithms. Now PNG uses a set of filters, but on top of that it actually uses zlib, which is, you know, the thing which zip uses, and like half of the web uses, like gzip and so on. That's the same algorithm and everything. So you put it in an image and then you turn it into a canvas and get the pixel values, and then you change them to actually ASCII characters, and then you have a string, and the string is your code, your JavaScript code, for example, right? So yeah, you just compress JavaScript code with a PNG algorithm gratis, like, because it was totally free of charge, because you didn't have to implement the decompressor for PNG because it's already in the browser. So be sure you can, you know, if you can use some tricks like that. Another trick, this is somewhat related, is, for example, if you're creating a game for Windows in C++, right, and you would like to compress your binary, then in case of UPX, for example, which is a free and open source compressor, you can compress it, but it actually appends the decompression code to your executable file. So you have compressed code and data, perhaps, plus the decompression algorithm. Now you can get rid of this decompression algorithm, for example, by using a library which is already in the system and already has a decompression routine which you can use. So if this is okay with the rules, and probably it is, because using system libraries is fine, just look for, I think it was like lz something.dll library, which has a decompression for one algorithm already there. And I'm not saying it's the UPX algorithm, but some other algorithm, but you can use that to compress your code, and you don't have to include your decompressor. So that's another way to approach it. Now, if you're creating the game in C or C++, the way you want to approach it is you want to actually write it in C and C++ and not write it in assembly, because writing the equivalent of 20 KB of compressed and compiled code in assembly is probably not going to work. You're going to spend a lot of time writing the code, because it's a lot of stuff to write, and you probably will have a hell of debugging that. Write it in C or C++ and actually get a compressing linker. There's something called, I think, linker in the past, like compressing linker, which can be used with either, I guess, Visual C++ or GCC with some kind of a compiler, and it will do a good job creating a small executable. And Krieger, if I remember correctly, actually did use this approach. And the other, I guess, thing is you might want to create your own compressor if you think you can do it better. Maybe even a linker if you think you can do it better. And this goes both for like JavaScript or whatever other language. You can do a lot of stuff by creating your own tools for making it shorter. Just be sure that if you are time limited, you can actually do it in a short enough period. That being said, I totally encourage you to try it at least once. Write your own compressor for whatever language or binary form, because that's pretty educational. Cool. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if you are space limited, you probably, if you need to include graphics, pre-made graphics, which you want to include, like for example PNGs from the open game TheFatRat, look how to create the smallest possible graphic file. And there are a couple of ways to do it. For example, if we look for PNG compression optimization, you can find a lot of links. Like for example, Tiny PNG is one thing, there are some websites, PNG Quant is another thing, OptiPNG is another thing, PNG Gauntlet is another. If you actually take a PNG and throw it in one or several of these tools or like websites or whatnot, then it actually turns out that you get a graphics which is either better compressed because of the way you can actually compress, you know, the zlib algorithm. You can do it in a couple of ways, and sometimes it gives smaller files. And also it creates the PNG with like the least amount of sections and uses proper filters for everything, PNG filters, so the file will be just smaller. And I guess we can make a quick test how one of these tools works. So I'm going to maybe copy this file. Oh, this is actually the layout for my sorry, let's do this. Okay, so this is the layout for my you know, this is what you see here, right? And I'm going to use, and it's a 209K. Now I'm going to run OptiPNG on it, and let's see if that gives anything. And it does something, does some magic, trying different approaches. And if we do dir again, we are 10 kilobytes less already, right? Now we can use, for example, I'm going to go into Irfan view and I'm going to save it, Control S, and there is this PNG out. This is another compressing plugin. I'm going to use it. I'm going to tell it, please convert it to 8 bits, because why not? And yeah, and that's it. And I'm going to call it like this, and it's going to start, and let's see if it actually does something. It takes quite a while for it to do the compression. And there are other, also other programs like that. I think I have PNG Quant installed as well. Yeah, I have it. So let's try it. I did a copy called X, was just a copy. And yeah, and this is from PNG Quant, is 132. So like another 80 kilobytes lost. And I think the image quality is actually almost identical, because PNG Quant it does lossy compression. It actually loses quality, but in a way which you can say that it's almost indistinguishable for a human eye. And if you are creating a game, you don't really need super sharp quality. This is not a photographic competition, right? And if you lose a couple of bits then per pixel, then it's already a gain for you. Let's see if this if Irfan we finished. No, it's still going. Okay, let's give it a few more seconds. So yeah, in case of resources, do look for tools which provide better compression, because the fact that your graphic program did some sort of compression doesn't mean that you can do better. And another thing is, do try for procedurally for generated graphics, generated music, generated sound, and so on. What I mean here is that sometimes it's just easier to code, like a code generating some kind of graphics might be smaller than code which actually, well, than the graphics even compressed really good. So I guess we're like, you can look at fractals, for example, for generating trees. You can look at like generating, for example, try to create a texture of a bricked wall and see if if you can do it programmatically. Let's maybe look at the browser. Is there a browser here? Brick wall texture. Yeah. Yeah, like this. Yeah, this is fine. Okay, I just want to, as an example. Okay. So, yeah, look at it and think if you can actually make this using some kind of algorithm, which is short to implement. And you might be able to actually easily do it, because each brick here is just a rectangle, right? And the rectangle has, if you look closely, here, for example, there is a shadow underneath, so it actually pops out a little. So, you know, but maybe if you draw a shadow-like thing, like a line beneath it, it will look a little better. And apart from that, just add noise. Noise everywhere, and the noise on the brick is anything from white, which is only sometimes happening, like, you know, these white spots here where the light is reflected, or like dark red spots, and do the noise in that color for the bricks, and for the concrete, which is between the bricks, just yeah, just like gray-ish. And see what you come up with and how much code is it actually. And it might turn out that, hey, you get a pretty decent brick texture, which is way smaller, like in code size. The code is way smaller than actually the texture itself if you want to compress it. So you can actually create quite a lot of graphics this way, quite a lot of nice graphics, a lot of, look at the demo scene, what these guys do for intros, like 4K intros or 256 byte intros. It's quite amazing, and all the graphic there is procedurally generated because you just don't have space to do anything else. Okay, so I think this, it actually finished, so let's see at the size. Yeah, well, it says it actually compressed it to 24 kilobytes. So we had 200 kilobytes at the beginning, and we have this much at the end. And if you actually look at it, it doesn't look too different from the original, I would say. I know there's a lot of white here, but there's something on the edges. So yeah, I guess if you use the proper tools, you can really decrease the size of your own resources, or you can try to generate them procedurally. And please keep in mind that it's quite easy to generate music notes in like JavaScript or whatnot. Like a music note is basically a sinus of time with a given frequency, right? And each note in music has its own frequency. And if you just write a set of functions which generate a note for you for the given frequency for a given amount of time, then you can create an array which say play this note, this note, this note, this note in this order for this length of time, and that gives you music. And that's not a lot of stuff to code. You just pass it to the sound card then, and you might get music. Which, if you play a little more with the sinus, for example, do the saw generation instead of a sine generation or a square generation, or some other fancy thing playing like with the amplitude and so on, or putting some notes together, then you might get a decent effect, and you might also be able to add music in a short amount of bytes. And that's also something where, if you look at the demo scene again, this is something they do in intros, 4K intros, which is not a lot of space, but they still manage to put music in somehow. And it's similar for sounds. You can try to compress the sound really hard, especially, for example, the browser can decompress it for you from MP3 or something. That's pretty decent, I guess, if you can get the files small enough. And maybe there are, again, tools which can compress it really small enough. Or maybe you can create some algorithm which will make a sound which is acceptable. Because if you are looking for an explosion, well, that's almost like white noise generation in sound effects, right? If you want firing a laser, that's also a rather simple mathematical function to do it. So look how to generate stuff, because that might allow you to save a lot of space. Now, one more thing I didn't mention yet is I did show you PNGs, but PNGs are actually bitmap graphics, right? So you don't have to use it, especially in browsers. Browsers know SVG, and SVG is actually a vector graphic format, and perhaps you can create vector graphics which might look even better, but it's like a way less smaller file. Even if the graphic is huge, right? It boils down to the details. How many details do you have? And SVG is an XML-based format. That's not really great, but maybe, just maybe, you can create your own format, which is then decompressed into an SVG by JavaScript and load that in your browser. So also take a look at that. Cool. I think I'm running out of tips actually. So yeah, I guess I would recommend taking part in both a time-limited competition and size-limited competition, regardless if that's game development or something else, because it's just fun to do it, or in some other type of constrained competition. There are two benefits here. First, if it's a time-limited competition, especially then like 12 hours, when you just focus for 12 hours on one thing and you learn a lot, really a lot about programming during that 12 hours. And that's a good thing. Especially if you're like, I don't know, coding for 1 year or 2 years, totally I encourage you to try it. And the other thing is, I guess it's related. I mean, apart from the focus, you do learn a lot, and you do learn new tricks, and after the competition, you can look at other people's, for example, how did they compress the code so it's even smaller. A special kind of competitions is code golf here, where you actually have to, you are given an algorithm and you have to implement it in the smallest amount of code possible. And you can look what tricks or what syntax in the language which you like, for example, what did other people use. Sorry. And you can learn a lot about the language and weird syntaxes and so on this way as well. Cool. So, sorry, let's go through the questions, and I guess we're going to finish for today. Next week is going to be, by the way, I'm going to play some games, and the games will be about hacking. So, and I will probably comment on like what parts are made up, but what parts they got right, or what parts are similar, or they got right by accident, for example. And oh, by the way, there's a mission today. Okay, so let's go through the questions and then we'll round it up. Can you develop Android game that will keep connection with your server, kind of IRC alerts about streams, etc.? I actually don't know. I have almost zero knowledge about how Android works and what kind of game can you develop and so on. So I don't know. So, sorry, please ask somebody who actually can Android. Can into Android. Yeah, that's, I guess, the proper Poland Bowl slang. As for learning game dev, is it worth to write your own C++, OpenGL game engine, physics, AI, render, collision, etc., or use existing and just focus on the game itself? It's a perfect question. The question in the end boils down to, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to learn a game engine, which is used in the industry, and then perhaps create a game based on that game engine? Or maybe you want to learn how such a game engine is implemented in the first place. Then perhaps do not use a ready engine and just use what well created from scratch, right? Or maybe you want to create a game, and in that case, what kind of game is it? Maybe it's easier for you to actually just code it from scratch because it's a simple game, or maybe it's easier for you to use an engine. And I don't think there is a good answer here. It's worth to try both approaches. Try create a game from scratch and then try create a game using Unreal Engine or like Unity or whatnot, because you do learn from looking how other people designed their engines. So you learn from it, and that's also a good thing to do. So I would recommend both. Yeah, why not both? From Przemysław, after recent MS Patch Tuesday, I've noticed Better disk performance on VMware Workstation VMs. Is it possible that OS update could affect such thing? Yeah, sure, it is possible, why not? But the question is, did it? Yeah, it's a good question. Like, a patch can change the way your file system manager works, for example, and what it prefetches for you. And if they did some optimization there, it might actually increase the performance on VM. On the other hand, you can, uninstall a patch and actually check before and after. Maybe that's not related. Maybe just a correlation without causation. How complex is the time zone problem in perspective of a developer? Good question. I guess, in all honesty, I didn't do too much stuff which had issues due to time zones, but I guess there might be stuff like that, especially if you start switching between time zones or calculating between two dates which are given a different time zone. But that being said, there are good libraries for that, and when I ever needed to use it, I just used the library. So yeah, it's hard for me to answer the problem because I escaped it using libraries for that. Yeah, sorry. Time and size limit. Is there a CPU limit to take care of? Depending on sub-competitions, especially on like algorithm competitions where you actually implement an algorithm to solve a problem, right? There is usually a time limit like 1 second or 10 seconds for a given set of input data. And yeah, in game dev competitions, usually there is no such limit. But you are obviously limited with what your graphic cards can do and what your CPU can do. Or, and this is actually a good question, an important thing to say, if your competition is like a demo scene, demo or intro competition, look at what machine are they going to use to play the demo. Because if your machine is more powerful, then you might have a hard time. Yeah, just optimize it for whatever machine is going to be tested on. For someone who can program, how can I learn about the popular APIs? Do you mean what are the popular APIs, or learn about some APIs you already have in mind? Answering the second question, just use them. Like, write a program which uses them. That's the only answer I have, in all honesty. As for the first one, I guess it's hard to address that question because it's like, yeah, I don't know, type in Google your technology which you like and API and see what pops up, or like look at what companies are requiring, what frameworks and so on. About the time zone problem, there is actually a link from the Han, which I guess we can take a look at. From computer file. I'm going to pass you the link on the channel, on the channels. Yeah, thank you, Dohan. Okay, perfect. So let's round it up for today. Thank you very much for being here. The mission, you will see it in a second. Thank you to KrzaQ for being my moderator today. And I guess see you tomorrow if you have, if you know Polish and you come to my streams. I will actually be trying to write a game in 1 hour with some more time, I guess, 1.5 hours maybe. I expect it to fail. I don't expect to be able to write a game, even a super simple game, in 1 hour, but let's see. I did actually write games in 3 hours, a tower defense in 3 hours in OpenGL, a 2D game obviously, but not in 1 hour, so this is going to be funny tomorrow on the Polish stream. Apart from that, see you next week, and yeah, so thank you, bye bye, and I'm leaving you with a mission and some music, so enjoy and good luck.